Hi, mental health workers, what's the most cked up thing you've seen? He just started slipping away. One of the kids I worked with changed overnight. One day he was totally fine, acting like himself. The next, he started hearing things that weren't real, seemed scared all the time, and slowly stopped talking. It was like his mind was shutting down. At first it was small things. He'd pause too long when answering questions, get lost in the middle of a sentence, or look confused when trying to drink from a cup. Then he began walking in circles around his room, mumbling random words, calling people strange names. He couldn't sleep, sometimes for days. Every day it got worse. He became stiff, tense, like his muscles were locking up. You could see in his eyes that he wasn't really there anymore. It felt like we were watching him disappear in slow motion. We begged for help. For 2 weeks we pushed and called and pleaded to get him professional care. Finally, he was admitted to the hospital. That's when we learned the truth. He had catatonia, a rare and complex brain disorder that messes with how your brain controls the body and emotions. It was serious. The doctors told us he had been close to dying. It took months of treatment and therapy before he began to return to himself. It was terrifying to see someone fall apart so fast, but also amazing to see him slowly come back. The look in his eyes still haunts me. I used to be a mental health clinician at a jail. One day I was doing a suicide risk eval on a young guy locked up for strangling his mom. The first time I met him, we spoke through the door of his cell. He told me he was hearing voices, command hallucinations, telling him to hurt people. That alone was serious. The next day, I checked in on him again after court. This time, I talked to him face to face, just outside his cell. A deputy stood nearby. At first, he seemed totally stable. He knew what happened in court, said his aunt was going to bond him out. He even sounded hopeful. But then, right in the middle of the conversation, something in him changed. It was subtle, but I felt it. Later, when we watched the footage, I realized I had stepped back without thinking. Suddenly, he lunged at me, went straight for my neck. I turned and bolted down the hall. He ran the other way before the deputy tackled him. I'll never forget the look in his eyes right before it happened. There was something chilling about them, like he wasn't fully human in that moment. That look still stays with me. The eyes that changed. I used to work at a special needs school for kids with severe disabilities. My students came in all ages and with all kinds of challenges. One of them in particular, he stood out. He was a big guy. About 6 feet tall, 250 pounds, and strong as a bull. Most days, he was gentle. He'd come over and rest his head on your shoulder or give you a long, warm hug. Really sweet kid, but something was off. I always felt like there were deeper issues that hadn't been diagnosed yet. We had these big red mats, about 5 feet tall, that we'd use to shield ourselves and others when a student got violent. They were part of our safety protocol. One day, he walked over and handed me one of those mats. I figured he wanted me to put it away, so I leaned it against the wall. But then he gave it back to me and tapped the top edge with his hand. His eyes filled with tears, and he looked down at the floor. Then he looked up, and I swear, his eyes weren't the same. They had turned cold, like shark eyes. The warmth was gone. That sweet boy was gone. Before I could react, he exploded. All 250 pounds of him came at me, clawing, kicking, biting, swinging. Pure rage. He wasn't just after me, he went for other students too. My adrenaline kicked in hard. I don't even know how we got through it. We wrestled with him for about 10 minutes. It felt like hours. Then, just like that, he sat down and started crying. When I looked into his eyes again, the softness had returned. His pretty brown eyes were back. He was mostly nonverbal and had really low cognitive ability. But he had episodes like that more than once. And every time, it was the same, his eyes would change, and he'd start pounding his fists into the ground like a gorilla. It was terrifying. Some days, it honestly felt like we were fighting off a full-grown silverback. Then it would end. He'd sit quietly, and cry, and I'd just feel helpless. Like I was watching a kid trapped inside something he couldn't control. The eyes that changed everything. Hey there, internet stranger. I used to work a job that sounds a lot like yours. Mine involved evaluating violent sex offenders to determine if they were ready to re-enter society or needed to stay locked up. It was intense. Some of those guys had a way of seeming totally normal, charming even. You'd lower your guard just a little, and then something else would surface. The shift was terrifying. That job, and what I saw out in the world later, convinced me that dissociative identity disorder is real. No more debate needed. I've seen it firsthand, when someone's main personality just disappears. And something else takes its place. Watching that happen is both terrifying and mesmerizing. You mentioning how a person's whole energy can shift, yeah, that brought one case right back to mind. There was this one inmate I'd built strong rapport with. We got along well. I was actually preparing to sign off on his transfer to a lower security level where he'd have more privileges. We were sitting together, going over the rules and behavior expectations. As we were talking, something changed in him. Fast. His pupils went from normal to huge, so big I couldn't even see the color of his eyes. Then, just as fast, they shrank to tiny pinpoints. His whole body changed. He sat different. His face hardened. Even his voice sounded unfamiliar, sharper, colder. Suddenly, he was furious. Angry and hostile, accusing me of things that made no sense. He was yelling, spitting when he talked, completely unlike the calm guy I'd known. And the way he spoke, he kept referring to himself in third person, as if he wasn't even the one in the room anymore. He was offended, really offended, that we would expect anything from him. It was like he'd become someone else entirely. I didn't sign the papers that day. OCD took her whole life. One of my closest friends has the most extreme case of OCD I've ever seen. And sure, I haven't known that many people with it, but this is something else. Her whole life is shaped by compulsions. She has tons of complex rituals. One of them requires her to go to this very specific spot every single day and perform exact actions, just so her mom won't die. She knows it doesn't make sense, and she'll even say it's irrational, but she can't stop. She physically can't let herself skip it. Another thing, she can't handle certain numbers in threes. Like, if she sees 111 on a license plate, she freezes. It's like she gets stuck. Then she has to hunt for 3 good, repeating numbers to cancel it out. She also has a list of words you can't say around her. If you say one by accident, she needs someone to say a safe word to undo the trigger. It's all very specific. These are just a few examples. Honestly, there's a whole world of rules she's trapped in. Then something happened, can't even remember what exactly, but it triggered her OCD so bad she stopped seeing her nieces. She used to watch them all the time, loved them like her own. Now she's convinced that just being around them might cause something awful to happen. She's been trying to undo whatever the trigger was, but she hasn't figured it out. It's been 3 years. At this point, OCD runs everything. She can't work, can't talk to some people, or even see them. She can't drive. Showering is hard for her too. And the thing is, she's brilliant, sweet, deeply kind. She knows none of this makes logical sense, but her brain won't let her stop. It's honestly heartbreaking to witness. What I saw on the adolescent psych floor. Working on an adolescent psych floor wasn't really scary, it was heartbreaking. I just felt like I needed to share, because seeing how mental illness shows up in kids, it really shook me. Most of the kids were between 10 and 16 years old, and nearly every one of them had some kind of disordered eating. It wasn't really about food, it was about control. When you're a kid and your world feels chaotic, sometimes food is the only thing you feel like you can control. There was one preteen who had gone through horrific sexual abuse. They wouldn't talk to anyone, wouldn't eat, for months. They eventually had to be fed through an NG tube, that's the kind of tube that goes through the nose, all the way down to the stomach, just so they could survive. Then there was another kid, super polite, kind, and sweet. Always pleasant with staff, but they were dealing with command hallucinations. Constant ones, telling them to kill their entire family. I've seen how brutal mental illness can be. But seeing it in children? It hits different. It's pain that doesn't belong in someone so young. The kid who just needed his medicine. Letter count, no spaces or punctuation, 960. I used to work as a special education teacher. There was this one kid I'll never forget. He had just moved into the area, and from day one, he stood out in the best way. Super polite, respectful, and thoughtful. Other students looked up to him. He was kind to everyone, even the ones other kids ignored. Since he had come from another state, his mom had to get him switched over to our state's Medicaid. That process takes forever. Meanwhile, his medication ran out. It was a controlled substance, so it wasn't like they could just refill it easily. About 2 weeks after we met him, everything changed. He started flipping tables and chairs, yelling at teachers, snapping at other kids. These outbursts happened at least twice a day for a week and a half. It was like watching a completely different person. Eventually, his mom was able to get the new Medicaid approved, and he got back on his meds. The very next day, he came in calm, smiling, and back to that thoughtful kid we'd first met. For the rest of the school year, he was my absolute best student. He even convinced some of my most difficult kids to give up violent video games and play Sonic the Hedgehog instead. He'd tell them to take deep breaths and calm down before reacting when they got mad. I still think about him often and really hope he's doing okay. The pencil. This is a story my grandma told me. Back in the 1970s, she worked as a custodian at a place called Bayview Mental Hospital. It was the kind of place where families would just drop people off, young, old, didn't matter, and leave them to be wards of the state. She later went on to work for Sharp, but Bayview stuck with her. There was this one boy there, maybe 9 or 10 years old. When he arrived, he had clear signs of physical abuse. Some patients, including him, were kept in single rooms with no access to the day room. Every day, before my grandma could go clean one of those rooms, a guard had to come and cuff the patient. This boy used to talk to her through the door, always super polite. He'd ask how her day was going, tell her she was his favorite person there. She said it broke her heart. She'd go home and cry, thinking about that little boy. Then one day, as she was waiting outside his room like usual, he called out, "Hi, Mrs. Sue. I think I'm going home today." She smiled and waited for the guard like always. But as soon as the guard entered the room to cuff him, the kid lunged at him with a pencil, stabbed him right through the cheek and in the arm before the guard finally got control of the situation. Turns out, he had tricked another staff member into giving him paper and a pencil by saying he wanted to draw. Instead, he sharpened that pencil to a fine point and waited for his chance. What really shook my grandma wasn't just the attack, it was how quickly the boy flipped from being a sweet little kid into someone capable of that kind of violence. That moment stuck with her. She said it messed with her trust in people for a long time after. Loop. We had a 20-year-old guy once who was battling severe OCD. His mind was relentless, and no medication ever seemed to help. He'd get caught in these exhausting cycles, asking over and over if everything was going to be okay. But no answer ever gave him peace. If you said anything besides, "Yes, everything's going to be okay," he'd immediately panic. He'd start yelling the question again and again, louder each time, until he heard that exact phrase. And even then, it would only calm him for a second before it started all over again. His whole family was being torn apart by it. Then came the intrusive thoughts, dark ones, especially about his younger sister. He despised himself for it. He hated that he was causing so much pain to the people he loved, and he was terrified by what his brain was doing to him. He tried to take his own life 3 times. Once before he was ever admitted, and 2 more times during the short windows between discharges and being readmitted. On his 4th attempt, he succeeded. It was one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed. His family was completely devastated, but also visibly drained. There was grief, guilt, and this heartbreaking sense of relief all at once. It was a nightmare with no clear ending. Eyes that change. I've been in early childhood special education for 15 years, now working as a behavior specialist with kids under 5. In that time, I've had 7 students with traumatic brain injuries, 4 of those were directly caused by severe abuse. One child I'm working with right now has been the most intense case of abuse I've ever encountered. What's chilling is how quickly he can flip. He'll be laughing, smiling, perfectly content. But then I give a simple instruction, something like, "It's time to clean up," or, "Please put the marker away," and in a split second, everything changes. The smile fades. His eyes lose all focus, like someone turned off the lights inside. Then suddenly he's lunging at another kid, knocking everything off the table, or bashing his head against it over and over. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. But now, after working with multiple kids who've had TBIs, I recognize the look. Their eyes shift, not like they're angry or defiant, but like they're not even there anymore. That blank, disconnected stare, it tells you it's not the child acting out. It's the trauma, the damage, and it's heartbreaking every single time. The lowest voice, letter count, no spaces or punctuation, 1055. This isn't about child abuse, this is about a specific kind of auditory hallucination. There are levels to how voices can enter a person's mind. Imagine this. The first level is like overhearing someone on TV, your brain registers it, but you don't give it weight. Then there's a voice directly speaking to you, which naturally feels more real and urgent. Beyond that, you have your own inner monologue, "I should do laundry," for example. You can consider that thought, maybe act on it, maybe not. But then there's something deeper. Something that bypasses choice entirely. Like blinking, or flinching. It doesn't feel like a decision, it just happens. I worked with people across all those layers. But there was one woman whose experience was different from anything else I'd seen. The voices she heard didn't come through thoughts or sound like whispers in her ear. they hit her at that instinctual level. When they told her to hurt herself, she didn't hesitate. There was no warning, no processing. She just did it, automatically. It wasn't defiance, and it wasn't a cry for help, it was complete control from something inside her she couldn't resist or pause to question. We tried everything, but the only way to quiet those voices was with such heavy medication that she could barely function. It dulled the hallucinations but also dulled everything else. She was left vacant, still, almost unreachable, and even though the danger faded with the medication, so did any sense of who she was. The illness that refuses help. I work as a psychologist, and out of all the mental illnesses I've seen, anorexia nervosa is one of the most frightening. It's also one of the most deadly. Right now, eating disorders in general are sadly very common, and they're incredibly hard on anyone who goes through them. But there's something especially chilling about classic restrictive anorexia. I've worked with patients who are slowly starving themselves to death, and no matter how hard you try, you just can't seem to reach them. They do not believe they are sick. They cannot see how thin they really are. It's almost like they're trapped in a different reality. Sometimes, it feels as close to a psychotic break as anything I've ever seen. What truly scares me is how far the body can go under this kind of pressure. These individuals eat almost nothing, and yet they still find the strength to overexercise, sometimes for hours. It doesn't seem physically possible, but somehow, their bodies hold on, until they just can't anymore. And when that point comes, it happens fast. I've had patients who wanted to live. They truly did, but when it came to food, their mind and body just shut down. They couldn't force themselves to eat, even if they knew it was killing them. That's what makes this illness so terrifying. It isn't about a lack of will to live. It's about a brain so overtaken by this disease that survival itself becomes impossible, even when the person desperately wants to survive. She just wanted to disappear. Letter count, no spaces or punctuation, 1317. I used to work on a med-surg unit that ended up being kind of a holding zone for psych patients who weren't stable enough to be in a regular psychiatric facility. We got everyone who was too medically fragile but still dealing with mental health crises. There's one patient I'll never forget. They'd actually worked on our floor before I started, so I didn't know them personally like many of the other staff did. Because of that, I was often assigned to care for them, maybe because it was easier for them to be around someone who didn't carry those old memories. They had a long, awful history of abuse, especially at the hands of their father, and managed to hold themselves together until they had children of their own. That's when it all fell apart. The trauma came crashing down and never really let up. They started attempting suicide over and over again. Each time they were found, it was usually by their poor partner, and each time they were placed on a psychiatric hold. There was one particular attempt that sticks with me the most. They had just been released after slitting their wrists. Not long after that, their partner found them trying to overdose on pills. Back to the hospital they came, this time completely unresponsive. Catatonic. On our floor, suicidal patients had a sitter at all times. Someone sat in their room 24/7, keeping watch. At that point, this patient had been doing a little better, so they weren't restrained anymore. It was the end of my shift when it all exploded. Without warning, they just shot up from bed and made a break for the exit. The poor CNA on duty was trying to hold them back but could barely keep up. I ran to help and grabbed onto them, but they just kept pushing forward, like they didn't even feel us there. I was significantly heavier and still couldn't slow them down. It took 4 grown men to bring them down and hold them in place until we could give them an emergency sedative. All the while, nurses who had known them before the breakdown were crying, begging them to stop. But their eyes were empty. No recognition, no hesitation, just that drive to escape and end it. I had to call their partner afterward to explain what happened. And I'll never forget how defeated they sounded. Completely worn out, trying to raise their children while also caring for a partner who was falling apart, and doing it in a system that didn't seem capable of offering real help. I've cried after a lot of night shifts, but that morning on the train home, I sobbed. I kept thinking of my grandmother, who drowned herself. Her sister, who hanged herself. My cousin, who survived more suicide attempts than I can count. I still wonder what happened to that patient. I try not to dwell on it. But sometimes it comes back. You can do everything right and still lose. I'm way late to share this, but this was the case that truly broke me. There was a couple from the US who adopted 2 siblings from overseas, a girl around 7 and her younger brother, maybe 2 years old at the time. Not long after, the girl strangled the family's cat and dog. Then she carefully placed both bodies on her parents' bed for them to find. She didn't cry. She didn't show any guilt. No emotion at all. She just sat there calmly coloring, as if nothing had happened. She even told me stories about a nurse at her previous long-term facility, how the nurse was afraid of her. And she sounded almost proud of that. Then, in the most casual voice, she told me her next plan: she was going to kill her brother. She was in and out of psychiatric care even after I was no longer working near her case. But while I was involved, it was terrifying. Her adoptive parents were doing everything right. They were trying their absolute best: therapy, special education support, a safe and loving home, structure, attention. You name it, they did it. They made their home as secure as they could. Her bedroom door locked from the outside. The house had been modified like a baby-proofed zone for older kids. No sharp objects, kitchen drawers locked, scissors completely removed. They were careful. They were loving. They did not give up. But still, it wasn't enough. After that first session, I went home and just cried. It shook me to the core. Because I saw it all so clearly. You can pour your heart into something, give everything you've got, and still lose. I've stepped away from the field since then. But I still think about that family. I hope, somehow, they're all doing better now. Healthier, safer, happier. They deserve that.